Romania did that. Romania killed Jews, Romania killed Roma people. Romania tried very hard to put in place a racial utopia between 1940 and 1944. And we could see that we haven't come out of that conversation yet, in the sense that we haven't forcefully and responsibly accepted our past. And as you know, as in any relationship, ultimately the truth always comes out. At the end of the day, it will catch up with you. And you can see this in societies which have not gone through this process of historical reckoning. The traumas are very deep. And the younger generations, you can see it's happening now in Romania, which is not necessarily a revival, as people wrongly say, of the legionary movement. It's a revival of a form of nationalism that's very putrid in many ways, but it was always there. And that type of education that was never given to young people was not done to really take out the disease that was within this form of nationalism. Now, all countries have it. So this is the first thing we need to understand. We're not making Romania look worse than other countries, certainly. It wasn't, surely, I mean, you can't compare with other countries which did not have a Holocaust. Whether we like it or not, the Holocaust did happen in Romania. So that in itself is an extraordinary moment in terms of national history. But in terms of ideas of nation, ideas of otherness, ideas of centralism, whatever the modern states do in the 19th century and then in the 20th century, Romania doesn't really strike a different chord in other countries in Central and Eastern Europe. So that's very important. But in other countries, the conversation has moved in certain ways, and in other ways, they haven't. It's a difficult conversation in Poland to talk about the Holocaust. Obviously, the Polish collaboration and the Polish anti-Semitism is still a subject the public doesn't really discuss and younger people don't want to touch. In Hungary, it's now absolutely impossible since Viktor Orban kind of capitalized the entire cultural system. My exhibition, which was mentioned by my colleague, has, I don't have an image here, has one panel is devoted to the victims and anti-eugenics attitude today. And I had a big poster with Orban holding a baby saying, the future belongs to the Hungarian baby. So this kind of eugenic rhetoric that, you know, the country is ours, and only our babies deserve to have the future of the country. It was a caricature in a way done by a punk artist called Vojvodin who moved to Budapest in the 1980s, and I happen to know him, and he only does Orban caricatures. So I told him, I want to introduce this in my exhibition. Okay. The problem is that they refuse to let me come into the country unless I take out that photo of Orban. So no institutions, and I have very good friends there, director of the National History Museum, and he said, I'm sorry, Marius, but you need to take out Orban, otherwise they will fire me. So you cannot have a conversation about topics which, on the one hand, are not considered to be a part of the accepted interpretation of the national past. On the other hand, it's very much present in Hungary, even more than in Romania. The official rhetoric about demography, about national identity, about national character, it's even more impregnated with the forms of thinking which emerged in the 1920s and 30s than it is in Romania. Although now we've seen recently with the new elections coming up, there is a certain revival in Romania too, where these sort of things I discuss in the book are becoming mainstream again. So that's the introduction to why I wanted to put everything together and finally write a book about Romania, a book rather than just articles. So I collected all the books I published for the past 20 years about Romanian history, and then I put it together. The problem was that they were all written in German or in English or French, but the translator did not go back to the original sources. So he translated from English back into Romanian. And I said, well, that's not possible. You need to go and find the original sources. And he said, well, I don't have time, whatever. And I did that. And then in the end, I decided, okay, I'm going to write the entire book. So although it's the translation of the articles, in fact, this is not a translation. It's a completely new book. They're not the articles which I initially wanted, because I went back to the sources and then I said, okay, I have so much that I accumulated, then I need to put in. So then it was the entirely new book. And some of the archives have disappeared entirely. So there are some of the archives that you'll see in the images that only I have now because they were destroyed. So, for example, one major eugenicist, Yuli Moldovan from Cluj, is the Institute of Public Health still carries his name. So we have his name there. His personal archive has disappeared. No one has seen it. One day, someone called me from Cluj and said, I found the personal archive, but because the person who has it stole it in 1990, it cannot go public, so it's going to destroy it. You're allowed to copy everything, and then it will burn it. I'm not joking. So this is one of the major, Romanian physicians. Yes, he was a eugenicist, but he's a major figure in Romanian public health and social hygiene. And it's a major contribution to medicine. So I copied it, and finally I found photos of him and some of his students that no one has seen, and then the archive had disappeared. In other cases, the archive of the Ministry of Social Assistance, it was deposited in a dilapidated house close to in Bucharest, on Pitarmoș, which belonged to the Catholic Church before 1945. So in 1990, I went for a drink, and I went inside. There weren't any signs. I went inside this courtyard because it looked like really interesting architecturally speaking. And then inside, I saw this chap, this man, and he was smoking outside. So I said, what is this? He said, oh, this is the archive of the Ministry of Health. And I'm the archivist. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Oh, I studied history. I said, oh, I studied history. Okay, so I go inside, and he had these massive cupboards with the personal files of all of these people. Sabine Manuel, Yogi Foucault, Rudaki Foucault, all of these names that no one has ever seen. I could not find the archives. Maria Bucu, who published a book on eugenics, you may know her name. The book was also translated in 2004 or 5. She has not seen the archive of the Ministry of Health and Social Assistance between the two period because officially it doesn't exist. And he was there. So I went into an absolute frenzy and I copied the personal files of all the authors I was interested in. The entire catalogue was about 20 DVDs, only the catalogue. And on this occasion, for example, I found that in Romania there were 4,000 schools of puericulture, for example, these kind of details, and they had the archive of everything. Sadly, the nuns got back, the Catholic Church got back the building, and they burned the entire thing. So now that archive is also gone, because I sent afterwards students to go and check, and it's also gone. You see what I mean? So some of these things are so impossible to study and research, because on the one hand, it's just by mere luck, absolute mere luck. I might have an image here of the Institute of Racial Hygiene, which they created, or racial biology, Ion Antonescu. So they created the institute in 1943, and no one doesn't appear in any other books apart from my book. And for a simple reason, no one knew it existed. And at some point, again, someone from the National Archives calls me and says, we were cleaning a cupboard, and there was a folder on the history of oil in Prahova. And so we wanted to burn it to Casat, as they say in Romania. And then we opened it, we found this file, and it said on it, the Institute of Racial Biology on Antonescu, with the organigram of the entire institute, everyone who was involved. Can you believe this? And they gave it to me. And that's been there from 1947, possibly 48, until 2002. Completely put aside by someone, clearly didn't want to destroy it, which was good. But now we know that actually such institutes exist in Romania. How is it possible to write still about things like this that, appear so central to the entire discussion, and yet no one knows anything about it? So I was trying to do this in the book, to put it together on the one hand, to write a kind of personal reckoning, as it were, my personal reading of Romanian history, about the topic which is the most important in Romanian history, which is the national character. Who are the Romanians and what are they? How are they? Is the question probably, if you are Romanian, asking yourself. And continuously we should ask ourselves, not just as individuals, but as society. This is the way we get better, by understanding ourselves and understanding our past. So I wanted to use the knowledge I had about all these different topics to rewrite this conversation, because I thought there is no consensus, there's absolutely no way to deny that something as horrific and terrible as the Holocaust happened. Then we have to find a way to explain how was it possible. You know, a certain archaeology of all these kind of things that come together in 1940, and they constitute the biopolitical program of UNESCO, which is basically not only the elimination of the Jews, but also the purification of the society, the way eugenicists understood it. We get rid of people like the Roma, particularly first the nomadic Roma who were deported to Transnistria, then assimilated Roma, then we get rid of people with disabilities. And this institute that I mentioned, they had the laws prepared for Antonescu to sign in 1944. And one of the laws is about sterilizing all the Roma that were assimilated. So those who survived were deported would have been sterilized in 1944. That did not happen the August moment they put it down. And every single person with disability, whether in the hospital or at home, would have been sterilized. So they would have continued to apply this sort of thing that we're talking about since the 80s onwards, you know, the Romanian peasant, Romanian family, Romanians should be like this, we deserve this and that, according to what at the time was the accepted definition of the nation, which wasn't only cultural and linguistic. They always said, you know, the language you can learn. He spoke very beautiful Italian, of course, you know, but ontologically he's not Italian. Any Italian will come and say, you know, what's the same with these guys? All of these Roma people, they speak Romanian, they look like Romanians, but obviously they're not Romanians. They say it today as well, right? They are, they could learn. So we need to find a way to really take out, you know, like you peel an onion. See layers and layers of identity you need to peel out until I get to that particular essence, what defines the Romanian as a Romanian, or Italian as Italian, or German as German. And that was always something biological blood. When anthropology and serology demonstrates by 1900 that actually each one of us have unique blood groups, and those of us who are related ethnically share the composition of the blood. And then we could trace the origin back not only to our family, but also to the region we come from. Yeah, all this sort of thing. It gave them such an impetus to demonstrate that actually we finally have a scientific way to prove who is a true Romanian. And some of the cases are completely amazing, and you'll find them in the book. So you get to a point when, and I mentioned this, a settler from Țara Secuilor, he comes to Bucharest. Many settlers came to Bucharest, particularly women, to work in hand, you know, servants in Bucharest in the 1920s and 30s. He comes to Ploiești and he becomes a famous architect. But the problem is that his parents converted to Judaism in the 1930s. There's a particular sect of Judaism is called the Sâmbătari, popular in that part of the world. And so he realizes, I have a problem, because obviously these guys want to deport me. So he writes a letter to Ioan Antonescu and says, you know, I am pure Romanian, Aryan Romanian. Right? So, and he demonstrates that, you know, his family conversion to Judaism has not affected his blood. So we're talking about absolutely mind-boggling readings, but real, that would transform your life. If you go to the deported to Transnistria, you would have died. What's even more interesting, he asked the Greek Catholic priest to write a memo for him to support his argument. Now, that's the interesting bit. The priest starts writing, and the literature the priest uses is extremely interesting. So he starts citing all these authors, Gobineau, Chamberlain, Adolf Hitler. So the moment I realized that in a small place like Ploiești, in a small quarter of Ploiești, the priest read all of these authors. The entire transmission of these ideas to the very basis of society had occurred. So this was not simply a scientific debate among 5 physicians. It was not something just 2 politicians talking about it. It was very widely disseminated. And I didn't have, none of the books that I read provide this kind of, you know, understanding of how it worked in real, how people actually acted on these ideas. We know now they act on these ideas. We see Romanian racism. We see Romanian eugenics. ideas manifest now, so you could understand them, but at the time you don't have historical sources. So I thought, but then I found. So the moment I could put the entire jigsaw together, it became very clear that actually this was passed on, and it started very early. It started with a big discussion in the 1870s and 1880s, the citizenship of the Jews, whether they should become citizens, under which conditions can the Jews be Romanians. Then I remember, hold on a second, but actually I read something when I was a student by Marius. Marius writes this about Marius Sebastian, right? You will always be a Jew from Breda, no matter what will happen to you, ontologically. And I realized if Marius Sebastian, then the problem became Romanian. He looked quite, very nicely dressed, well educated. How about my Yiddish-speaking Jews from Maramuresh or shepherds or Yeri? And they were saying to us, how Romanians were they? When their alterity, the way they looked, was completely different than any form of assimilation. They never assimilated to anything. And then Ionescu also says at some point, talking about the Catholics, you could be good Romanians, and maybe some of you are, but are you actually Romanian? And I realized this is the ontological question of the entire Romanian culture. You look around and you know, we are Romanians, and we know who we are, and the others aren't. So I was trying to, it's an important question for me. I left Maramuresh when I was 18. I came to Bucharest, and then I lived in England more than I lived in Romania. And obviously the question of identity is important to me, and I'm very proud to be from Romania. I'm very proud to have this history, and very proud of my ancestors. So there's another question that you simply ask yourself, in terms of the scholarship, and because you write books. I didn't want to write a book for the sake of writing books. I don't need to do that anymore. I want to write books about I really care. I want to write in a way I feel that I have something to participate in terms of my own understanding. So I put together this book, and I tried to offer as many examples as I possibly could. Some of them are quite hilarious, some of them are very tragic. I write about disability. And so this woman, I give an example in the book, has a son with disability, and she's in Bucharest, and she kills him because she said, I could not tolerate any more walking on the streets of Bucharest, and everybody was saying bad things about him. And then she killed herself. But before she killed herself, she wrote these letters to Romanian politicians. So I found her. And she says, had you introduced eugenic laws that would prevent people, she blames the man who had a son with, who had congenital syphilis. And because of that syphilis, her son had a disability. So she says, had you introduced these eugenic laws that eugenics is asking for, they would have prevented me from marrying him because he would have been spotted with syphilis. And then, so you see how the connection, and then the case is picked up in Romanian parliament, and you have the politicians talking about it, and it's a very big debate about premarital certificates. Now the irony is that they did introduce 1943. So when people say, well, there were no eugenic laws in Romania introduced at the time, that's not true. The premarital certificate was introduced in 1943 and it exists to this day. So if you want to see, I don't know how many of you got married in Romania, I'm sure you remember that. It probably is not compulsory now, but it used to be compulsory. All of you had to go and do that. So some of these cases clearly shows how people understood disability. People who had the various problems, how and why the penal code from 1936, which is called the Carol al-Doilea Code of Penal, introduced an article which was degeneration of the race, and it was directed only at young people. So if you married or had children before the age of 18, they would put you in jail under the article, the racial article in the penal code. So this is 1936, right? Now, who knows about these things? Now, I found the names of the young people. The only problem these young people had was that they fell in love and had a baby. It's not the worst thing that would happen. It didn't matter. So either if you didn't have parents, then the custodians would be asked to pay a fee and you'd be put in jail. And I found the hospital in Transylvania, which was created in the 1940s, where these young people were put. So imagine we had in Romania a hospital where it had a section where people who were there for the degeneration of the race argument. It's absolutely mind-blowing. So I try to offer a lot of these sort of things apart from kind of the discussion about nationalism. Sorry, I realized I have sort of photos for you. So I start in the book trying to put it in context, and I say, well, there is a way to understand that going back to some of the moments in the 1880s. You have specialists in modern history, they know the political history of the country, they know these sort of things very well. But there's also a rewriting of the canonical figures of the Romanian culture in the way, so this is one example from the 1930s, of when Eminescu was like the greatest Romanian poet, but also a very important conservative thinker. You wrote Fico Servator. Huh? Did you edit that book? No? I remember a book that was called Fico Servator. So a key figure, but he's also, one of the early proponents of a certain type of dealing with the Jews. Some may call it anti-Semitic, and certain younger scholars now would call it very easily anti-Semitic. But certain things are clearly motivated by a form of organic kind of nationalism that he felt Romania needs. So I tried to look at these figures from the 1880s and then bring it all together to the 1920s, the 1930s and 40s. So I'm going to give just some of the key concepts. So one is nationalism, I write about that. The other one is anti-Semitism, and particularly the whole debate about how the Romanian peasant, if we don't care about the peasant family and the peasants, they're going to disappear, they're going to degenerate. Their living conditions are terrible, their hygiene is terrible, their alcoholism is rampant. Those of you interested in this interesting ideas, you'll find some wonderful examples about alcoholism in Marius. So obviously I wrote about my own. If you really want to write something sensitive, write about your own family, not about the others' family. So I found this interesting research done by Astra in Marius of how many liters of Horing we drink a year. And everybody drinks coke. The grandma drinks, the father drinks, the baby drinks. We just continuously drinking. But no, there was a serious conversation, of course, that alcoholism and all of these diseases are contributing to the weakening of the social and society, social body, and biological body of the nation. But there's also a big conversation about the Jews being the virus infiltrating our society then and now. This conversation continues, and they are contributors to the degeneration of the Romanian peasant, indirectly by buying them drinks. It's like, the settlers did with North American Indians. They went there, they gave everyone whiskey, and then, they tried to exterminate them. So someone like Pavlescu will write along this line saying, these Jews are coming from Galicia, and they buy all the pubs, and they produce a lot of alcohol, and they give it to the poor Romanian peasant who doesn't know any better. So you have that form, and of course prostitution. But also, by being with us, their mere presence, and this is what I got interested in, okay, these anti-Semitic arguments after a while, not only they're repetitive, but also very boring. They're not very creative. But when they get creative is when they start talking about how the contamination really happens. I mean, this is way before the Nazis talking about the virus. The mere presence of the Jew in the room is enough to really kind of cloud my judgment. I start seeing double. It's enough for the woman to be completely under its spell. Right? So when they start writing these sort of things, which are about feelings, it's about kind of how the mind works, then it gets very interesting. So I try to understand that in the books, and that's another element. And then I looked at anthropology, how Romanian anthropology emerges, and then how certain groups react. I wrote about how the Hungarians reacted to the Romanian claims, because Romanians got quite, as any, a few exceptions, and most anthropologists at the time in the 1930s, they got a bit carried away. So obviously they realized Hungary is not going to give up on its territorial claims. But the only solution is transfer of population. So they transferred the settlers from Bukovina to Hungary. after 1938. They transferred Bulgarians to Bulgaria and Turks to Turkey. So transferred the population to create homogeneous, so only Romanians and all. But they had the problem with the sectors, because if you look at the map of Transylvania, the sectors are there surrounded by Romanians, right? And then anthropologists came and said, hold on a second, but we have a solution to this. We could demonstrate through anthropological and sociological analysis that the sectors are in fact Romanians. They were Magyarized later, but racially speaking, they are Romanian. So if all of us are now racially Romanian, then we create a perfect homogeneous country without any problems. So Manuela, who's the director of the Central Institute of Statistics, writes to Antonescu all of these ideas, and they try to put it into practice. And it becomes very important because they start issuing certificates of nationality. Have you seen one of those? No? Absolutely amazing. So it's not enough to say you are Romanian, you need to go and be certified. And it says there, and I've seen some of that, it's absolutely important on the one hand. So the sectors have to have that, and the Changai, the Chango from Moldova. And then the Roma were asked, and maybe I have an image here, but it will definitely be in the book. So they were sent to all the mayors in villages and cities across Romania from the Ministry of Justice. And I have a very big chapter on racism against Roma, a telegram from the Ministry of Justice saying the Roma, and he says Romi, and in brackets, Țigani, so they knew how to use both words, Romi and Țigani, nu sunt români de sânge. And clearly, because a lot of the Roma were trying to avoid deportation to Transnistria by saying, I'm a good citizen, right? I pay my taxes. I'm not a thief. Not all of us are thieves, or, And my grandfather fought in the First World War. There were many Roma who fought in the First World War. Yeah? But like Ionescu said, are you good Romanians? But are you Romanians? Clearly not. So anthropology could provide this, and they were absolutely taking it. It could change. It could, like in Nazi Germany or in German, even Nazi-occupied Europe. If you're declared to be of that particular race or that particular group, could really impact your entire life and change your destiny forever. So it was not just an academic conversation, not just a topic that was for specialized journals, but actually, regrettably. And in this way, then I can understand why and how it could lead to pogroms, it could lead to deportation, it could lead to annihilation. This is Francis Reiner, one of the most important Romanian naturalists of the 20th century and an anthropologist, and he was carrying his research. He was working with Dimitri Custi, some of you may know the name, one of the important sociologists of the interwar period. And they started in the 1920s to go around the country to find those pockets of true Romanianness. Right? So they did analysis of the way they cultivate the land, the way that the houses looked. Tell me when I need to stop, so don't be shy. Just tell me to stop, I'll stop. But also measured, and I found this wonderful photo in the archive of this poor place. And you have to understand that. I mean, I work on global contexts, and I read so much about what happened in the colonies, or how the British or the French went to Africa and took pictures of all these weird people, and there is a sense there that obviously, on the one hand, he stays there voluntarily, but actually it's not. It's all staged. The peasant didn't want to stay there, and certainly didn't like being touched by all of these doctors who came and started measuring him. But they tried to find the perfect Romanian head, and you could see how scared he is, So we need to understand how these ideas, because they continue in many ways to shape so much of our thinking about people, right? And then it gets to biopolitics. That's a shock for anyone, particularly in English-speaking countries, because obviously people know about biopolitics because of Michel Foucault. So everybody read that in the 1980s. But of course, I go and tell them, well, Romania had a biopolitical journal already in 1947. Romania had the first biopolitical institute in the world in 1943. So Moldova renames the Institute of Social Hygiene and Public Health as the Institute of Biopolitics. And they absolutely followed their chairs. They could not believe that actually these were way before it becomes fashionable. And the understanding is simply the same. You know, it's basically applied biology. Politics is applied biology, as the secular used to say. Ultimately, if you don't understand the biological laws, you don't understand how society works. And they were trying to find that. So I write about that. Okay, this is not from academic journals, this is from newspapers, and as we call it today, Zjadele Skandal, or tabloids. So when you have this in every tabloid, and I love that, you know why? Because obviously, how do you pass on the message? Yeah? You need to speak the language people understand. Now, of course, in the 1920s, what kind of image you would use? You use the Hollywood films, which became very popular in Romania. So everybody knew about, you know, Clark Gable and Gone with the Winds. Yeah. So if you look at, they write an article about how important it is to eugenic marriage to choose the right spouse. That, you know, is not only intelligent and beautiful, but not too intelligent, not too beautiful, because there's a problem. But, you know, healthy, so you could have healthy babies. But then, of course, to pass on the message, they choose the image of Hollywood actors, because everybody knew the actors. So I was always fascinated by how these people were trying to convince the audience. Yeah? I also looked at things like, you would not imagine the kind of things I looked at. So, for example, the radio program for the interwar period. Because in the interwar period, they didn't have TV, TikTok, or Instagram, whatever. People listened to the radio. In the village, you had a big speaker, and you listen to Carol, or the King, Michael, or Antonescu speaking to the country. Yeah? It was on the radio. Now, interestingly, all of these guys, famous professors, went to the radio and spoke about these topics. And I found in the archive of the radio, their transcripts of their talks at the radio about eugenics, about race. And it's a completely different language. So when Gheorghe Marinescu, the famous psychiatrist, one of the biggest Romanian scientists, who goes to the radio and talks about eugenics and Romanism și eugenie, the language he uses is the way we talk now. He doesn't use any fancy words, no difficult concepts. He simply explains for the uneducated person who listens to the big name that this is something for him or for her and it's important. And then I realized the moment this transition happens, the moment these people are balancing the act nowadays and they say, well, no one is going to read scientific books, no one is going to read Bulletin Eugenic, but we're going to go around and talk the radio. Astra, you probably heard of it, yeah, a big organization. By 1930s, Astra has been to every single village in Transylvania, every single village, and they showed at least 40 films about eugenics and heredity in the villages, in every single village. Now, I'm sure these peasants, imagine you come at 7 o'clock in the evening after you work the land, a few, you know, the last thing you remember probably will be a film about heredity and eugenics, right? But after a while, something still sticks in your head. Yeah, they were illiterate peasants. They didn't know how to read and write, but the film was something that they could use to pass on the message. And they would tell them, you know, how do you use when you choose for an animal? You cannot imagine the language, so simplistic, in a way so trivial, but extremely effective as a message. Like you do it now with TikTok and Instagram, 2 seconds, right? The message, bam, you got it. Could be complete, absolutely the biggest lie in the world. But that doesn't mean it's not, you know, people don't believe in it. So this is the sort of things I wanted to bring in to actually demonstrate, because the entire Romanian scholarship said for decades, as Rudolf said, that there was no racist foundation to the Holocaust, and no eugenic foundation to the Holocaust. And I wanted to demonstrate this is not true. Again, not to make the Romanian case exemplary or different in other cases. That would happen in Hungary as well, for example, or in the independent state of Croatia after 1940. But we haven't done it. And then we have examples, and this is eugenics, books published, you know, literally saying, you know, how that sort of things are clear. Yeah? It's not using the words, they're not using metaphors. They're not saying, you know, the Guardian of Eden, or, you know, Lassen's DNA. No, it's very clearly eugenics for the Romanian people. Bang. Yeah? And it's not big. It's like 7 pages. You're not going to read 200 pages. So we need to get to that point. Pardon? Odobescu, there's one of the physicians from Bucharest. He was the director of the clinic of gynecology at the Colentina Hospital. Now, this is one of the photos I found in the archive, Moldovan archive, that I told you that disappears. So I have a photo of him in the garden reading a book. And I'm the only one in the world who has the photo. Now, this is not normal in any other country. I mean, you need to have the archive where the archives are, right? If you want to go and study this. So no one can come actually write about this unless they ask, can I look at these personal files, his letters? He was a very important physician in the Austro-Hungarian army. They created the entire sanitary system of Transylvania with Consumed Diligent in 1919. So this is a very big name. Yeah? But so, I will show you an example. So Gheorghe Marinescu, I put there, this is Gheorghe Banu, again, the first professor of social hygiene in the University of Bucharest. He was a member in Goga Kuza government in 1938, Minister of Health. So some of these people, like Moldovan was Minister of Health, Banu was Minister of Health. So in other words, you have people literally in the position of power. So these major eugenicists are actually, Moldovan introduced the sanitary law of 1930, was created by Moldovan. It's called the Moldovan law. So the entire modern sort of sanitary guidances you have in the 1930s is created by them. So obviously, it impacted every single person, from the rural dispensary to the biggest hospitals. And Făcăoară, a big name. This was, for many years, I didn't know when he died, for example. That's the other thing that really infuriates me. I started writing about someone, and no one knows when he was born, when he died. There's no personal. And ironically, who told me about this guy who died, Lucian Voia, who obviously very much hates what I write. But the funny thing is that his father went to Transnistria. Voia's father was in the army during the Second War, probably you know that. And he knew personally some of these guys, and so it was absolutely random at some point. He said something about this, and I said, oh, so basically, if he was there, he must have known these guys. And he said, oh no, but I remember them in the 1970s. And I said, do you know when he died? He said, yeah, 1984. I found this person on the file, so I know he was, after the war, he had a goat, and he was living in a Bahala around Bucharest, he was hiding. So I knew something about him until the 1950s, but not when he died. So this is, I'm trying to give you this example to tell you how difficult, this is why it takes 30 years to put something together, which obviously in any other country this would have happened very quickly. But in our case, we didn't have basic data about how to, and he was one of them. And that he had a brother. So a lot of the scholarship, the Elite Commission for the Holocaust, they mentioned Făcăoară, because he wrote some of the horrific things about the Roma, sterilized, But the funny thing is not him, it's his brother. He had 7 brothers. So these poor guys, Viorela, Kim and others, they were writing about Făcăoară, not knowing actually they're talking about the wrong guy. They didn't know. Yeah. I found his genealogy. He published his own genealogy in 1975, and he donated to the Romanian Academy. Sabine Manuela, a very important name, and the director of the Institute of Statistics, as I said, and he's one of the personal friends of Ioan Antonescu. Yesterday I spoke about something for the first time, and I'll share with you just a snippet. I found one of these major eugenicists who was very close to Antonescu. He performed medical experiments on patients in the Central Military Hospital in Bucharest. And he killed some of them to take their brain out to study. So it's absolutely shocking, because obviously we know this about the Nazi doctors. For a Romanian to hear a story like this, that in Romanian hospitals during the 1940s, they were carrying out experiments for patients. And I found the names of the people experimented on. It's how difficult it is for us to look back and accept that it's part of our history. And ironically, he was not tried for medical crimes. He was tried because he was friends with Antonescu. He dies in 1969 and is considered, in all the books you read, as one of the founding fathers of founding, or the most important Romanian geneticist. This is Sudovescu that I mentioned. He wrote the book. So that's some of these people they completely disappeared from the public memories they were. But they were very important at the time. You'll find many of this in the book. I want to give you this one. So this is one of the most important Romanian Orthodox theologian of the 20th century. So he taught at the University, Andreana University in Sibiu, the theological seminar and then the university. Now he writes one of the most extreme racist things ever. Right? So he says, the moment You stop being a racist, you stop being a Romanian. So this didn't come from a physician, didn't come from an anthropologist, didn't come from folklore. It came from one of the guys who now the Romanian Orthodox Church wants to canonize, yeah? Who would say absolutely horrific things. He, for example, came up with the whole thing about mitich, you know, the mitich that we use in the, I found in the 1930s. He writes about this from a eugenic point of view. He says, in the South, you have hybrid human beings. These hybrids are a combination of inferior races and the pure Romanians, or East from Transylvania, obviously. And he calls them mitich. So I found the discussion about mitich in all of these texts because it was obviously the racist argument. These Romanians from Bucharest, they actually not the true Romanians anymore. And you read about it, it's like, wow. And these are the guys, yeah? They're completely part of the conversation. If you are anyone who has any theological education or has been to the seminary would have known about this standard text, you read it. Yeah? But of course, no one. So I wanted to bring that in and write about racism. And wonderfully, you see, the literature is, I use 1,000 notes in the book. It's only primary sources. I didn't want to use any secondary source for my book. So if you read the book, you'll not find secondary sources. Because I didn't want to complicate the narrative. I just wanted to read and make an opinion yourself, not me, my I'll write another book maybe at some point. I'll be my interpretation of the sources that I have put in the book. Because the sources are so much, you cannot imagine how much it was written. And the shock, this is the gypsies are not Romanians by blood. And you see, this is sent to Tecuci. Yeah. So the mayor of Tecuci writes to the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice then appoints the lawyers, and the lawyers write the draft how to call these people. It's absolutely mind. So you have the legal experts of the High Constitutional Court in Romania in 1943, 1944. They write the proper law, how to find the assimilated robber and how to spot them out. But I also write about this, we shouldn't forget that, pockets of resistance, then as now. As much as we now try to fight racism, xenophobia, and all forms of injustice, we fight now, at least some of us fight now, then there were people who fought against this. There were a lot of resistance, some of them were leftist intellectuals, some of them are Jewish, so this is by a Jewish physician. Klinsmann was under the pseudonym Y. You have people like Petre Andrei, the sociologist. You have Traian Popa, Popa, not Traian, what's his first name? From Iași. So I give a lot of examples. You have women. So I found a woman who, they're extraordinary. I don't know much about her. She was a doctor in a small village in Prahova. And she writes a letter to Gheorghe Marinescu, who's the top Romanian scientist, right? But also the president of the Romanian Eugenic Society. And she says, very critical of the program of the Eugenic Society, and she criticizes Marinescu for being, instead of giving money to mothers in the village who cannot feed their babies because they're poor, you start talking about all these ideas about, improving the race. And so she's very critical of, so she has the courage as a doctor in a small village to attack. The irony is that is not Marinescu who responds to her. He's one of his students, another famous Șoboteau, big name in the Romanian side. And he writes against her, saying, you're very naive, you don't understand. But no, she's not. She understood very clearly what Romanian villages needed, or Romanian peasants needed, was food and medicine. And she said, why don't you open a kindergarten or a creche rather than talk about it? So these pockets of resistance are very important. I tried to, as much as I could, simple reactions from people, normal people should be, remember, not just the intellectuals. And then you get to the 1940s, you have these sort of things. I don't know how much you know about it, but it might be shocking to you, right? So books with these titles, Romanian imperialism. So basically, they knew we can't go towards the West, but the East is still open to conversation, particularly if they win the war against the Soviet Union. So they could expand the Romanian Empire. I'm coming to an end soon. This is the Institute of Racial Biology. Look at that beauty thing. This is the Institute of Marshall and Antonescu. You see, and look at the sections: human genetics, bioanthropology, eugenics, biopolitics, everything mapped out. Yeah. Now the funny thing is, I mentioned that law, they would have sterilized people with disability and the Roma. Now that becomes, they take out the 2 articles about sterilization, So that's called the Family Code in 1943. In 1966, Ceausescu introduced that. It was the same thing. I compared the two things. So you could see the transmission. I mentioned this in the book, how a lot of these things did not disappear, as we know. I mean, we defeated Nazism, but we didn't defeat anti-Semitism or racism in 1945, right? Well, many of these ideas continued, and in our case, it's very important because communism readapted, resemanticized, changed the words, but the meaning remains the same. A lot of these ideas. And the most horrific example we have of that is, think of the orphanages in the 1990s and how these babies and children were put there. Most of them were Roma, and most of them had disability. And the language used by these people, according to the law, they were not irrecuperably. It's a eugenic expression used in the 1930s. You're absolutely a burden on society. Your life isn't worthy of living. There's a Nazi life unworthy of living. All of these expressions were completely reintegrated. And in the 1990s, for the first time, we saw, I don't know how many of you remember, some of you are too young, that it was exposed to our face, and we could not believe it. We could not believe this sort of thing. Now, this is from the 1930s, although it looks like a communist poster, but actually this is the 1930s, because they had all of these ideas already then. So not only eugenic ideas about abortion or naturalism survived, the type of nationalism that was cultivated in the 60s and 70s and then it really becomes toxic in the 1980s in Romania takes a lot of that from the Hitler period. And you can see it to this day. Now, when everybody is desperately trying to find on Google what legionary means after the presidential election, you realize, how is it possible that someone is able to really, after batting almost, to recite from Antonescu without any kind of problem? And people are saying, oh, these are absolutely fantastic ideas, we should. There is a moment when I think we failed. We failed seriously as educators, we failed seriously as teachers. We did not do it properly. And historians have the responsibility to actually say things that should be said, even if they are difficult, they are sensitive, but that's the only way to move forward, I think. Thank you.